Before we get started on the talk, please join me in invoking Buddha's name 3 times. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Good evening, everyone. Good cold evening. All right, I attempted to move this completely online, so for those of you that are watching online, feel free to leave your questions, comments, emotional outbursts in the comments, and then my dear assistant will transfer those questions to me. Okay, so we're going to continue on the Amitabha Sutra. So this is the second class on the Buddha pronounces the Amitabha Sutra. So in last class, we just pretty much covered what the sutra is, what type of sutra it is, and then we also covered the 12 scriptural categories of the different types of sutras. So of the 12, I'm just going to quickly reference them really quick. So the 12 scriptural categories, or the divisions of the sutras, are in prose or expositions, verses, revelatory accounts, predictions of Buddhahood, the metered verses, or like gathas, the special verses or sutras that are spoken without request, the ethical narratives or sutras on karma, causes and conditions, analogies or illustrative accounts, specifically life stories of Buddha's disciples. Then we have ancient narratives and past events of Buddhas, past life accounts of ancient narratives of past events of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and his disciples. And we have past life accounts of the Buddha, which are the Jataka tales. We have universal writings or epic presentations. These are mainly Mahayana sutras. Then we have fabulous accounts, which is more or less the Abhidharma, so the Buddhist psychology and commentary. And we also have the decisive explanations or the commentary division. So the Amitabha Sutra falls under the category of sutras that were given without request, because the majority of the sutras, the Buddha gave those discourses because someone had asked a question. So one of his disciples, either one of his monastics have asked a question, or questioned a teaching to be reiterated or to be re-referenced, or lay disciples would ask questions. And so most sutras are kind of fall under that category. Question and answer kind of a perspective. But since the Amitabha Sutra was kind of too profound, right, and too profound for the Shravakas, which are the voice hearers or the Bodhisattvas, to comprehend, no one really requested the Pure Land Sutras, the Pure Land Dharma. But nonetheless, it is one of the sutras that the Buddha kind of spontaneously spoke about, and it's a pretty important sutra. It's one of the most well-known sutras. It's one of the 3 main sutras in the Pure Land tradition. So there's the larger Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra, which is the larger Amitabha Sutra, the shorter Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra, which is the smaller sutra that we chant in the evening. And then we have the sutra on the contemplation or the meditation of Amitabha Buddha. So those are the 3 main sutras in the Pure Land tradition. But for this class, for the next few months, we'll only be speaking on the shorter Sukhavati Vyuha Sutra, titled "The Buddha Speaks of Amitabha Sutra," or the Buddha pronounces the Sutra of Amitabha. So today I'm gonna cover the 5-fold profound meanings of sutras. So we're still speaking kind of in general here when it comes to sutras. So we're not going to get into the Amitabha Sutra itself for a couple more weeks, but I kind of want to go over the different types of sutras, the meanings of the types of sutras there are, because if you are able to, if you know the title of a sutra, you'll know what kind of sutra it is. So that way it's kind of easy to recognize if you're going through like a list of sutras or discourses and you see the titles, by knowing the title, you'll know what the sutra is describing or what we'll be teaching in that sutra. So in the Tiandai school, which is part of our tradition, the sutras are outlined according to these five-fold profound meanings. And so there are 5 of them, which is explaining the name, describing the substance, clarifying the principle, discussing the function, and determining the teaching mark. So today I'm just going to cover the number 1, which is explaining the sutra. And in explaining the sutra, there are 2 sub-parts. There's the common title and the special title. I'm just going to cover the common title for this class because it's pretty lengthy. And then the next class, I'll cover the special title and then the second profound meaning of describing the substance. So again, if we are able to know the sutra's name, then we can understand its principles. So the titles of all Buddhist sutras are divided into 2 parts, right? The common title and the special title. The special title here is the Buddha speaks of Amitabha, right? So we know what the sutra is about, and that's kind of the special title. The common title will just be sutra, right? So sutra is just kind of the general, hey, this is a sutra, which is all the discourses that the Buddha taught anyway. And so in the common title, we have 5 meanings. We have the basic dharma, the subtle dharma, bubbling spring, which I always find humorous, guideline, and garland. So the basic dharma is also sub-categorized in 4 categories. And so the basic dharma, just in general, is the Buddha that reveals the origin of his dharma with his teachings by means of the 4 kinds of complete giving. So those are the subcategories. The first complete giving is mundane complete giving, which he is just using like ordinary methods of expression, just using kind of common language to teach. Then there's the curative complete giving, which is kind of curing each living being of his or her particular problem. So these are the type of sutras that are taught or given directly to a specific person that is in need. If the Buddha senses that they are troubled with sensual desire, for instance, right? Or with jealousy, or with, stinginess, he'll teach them very specific teachings that will only help them, right? Then we have the complete giving that is for everybody. So these are the teachings for the sake of all being. So it's kind of a blanket teaching that applies to everyone. And lastly, we have the complete giving of the primary meaning. And this is kind of the highest principle to all beings. So these are kind of like the higher teachings or the more elaborate, dramatic sutras. The second of the 5 meanings is the subtle dharma. So in some sutras, unless the profound and kind of the profound doctrines in that sutra are pretty clear, then no one really knows of them. So there are sutras that have a lot of kind of subtle teachings, but it's not very clear, right? There's no just one main point to the sutra. There's smaller mini points throughout the sutra. And so it's one of those sutras where you really have to read and read and read over and over again to kind of be able to get a true taste of what the teaching is about. To me, this is just a personal opinion, but I think the Lotus Sutra kind of falls under this, because in the Lotus Sutra, even though there's a grand moral to the end, at the end of this, right, which is the main teaching of the Lotus Sutra, is that all sentient beings are able to attain Buddhahood, right? That's the moral of the story. That's the moral of the sutra. But within the 28 chapters of the Lotus Sutra, there are many teachings, right? They're kind of included here and there throughout the whole sutra. And so it's one of those things where we have to know a little bit of background in Buddhism, because in the Lotus Sutra, it mentions the Four Noble Truths, it mentions the 12 links of dependent origination, it mentions the 6 perfections, or the paramittas, and the different stages of meditation. And so unless we know some of that kind of background of those teachings, it's going to be kind of difficult to really be able to grasp what that teaching or the sutra is teaching us, right? And so this is where the teaching can be subtle, right? Like you really have to know. It's subtle because it's not explaining the 6 perfections. It's not explaining the Four Noble Truths. It's just kind of thrown out there with the expectation that you already have some knowledge or idea of what those teachings are. The third meaning is the bubbling spring. So these are the principles and teachings that flow, kind of gush out of these sutras, like artesian wells, is what it's saying here. The fourth meaning is guidelines. So these are sutras that are used to guide people, guide the practitioners. So sutras like the Chakravatana Sutra, which the sutra of turning the Dharma wheel, right? This is a sutra that is teaching the Four Noble Truths, right? Eightfold Path. So it's a very specific teaching that's guiding us how to practice and how to become enlightened via the Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path. The last meaning is garland, and these are the principles that are linked together in sutras, like flowers woven into a garland. And so this is the highest form of teachings, and so the Lotus Sutra does fall into this category as well as the Flower Garland Sutra, the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Shurangama Sutra. These are sutras that link major teachings together in one sutra. And then I don't think I covered this in last class, because we talked about the meaning of sutra, right? Kind of generally meaning that strings or thread or kind of like linking together. But there's also 4 additional meanings of sutra. The first one is stringing together. So sutras string together the principles of the Buddha Dharma, of the teachings of the Buddha. It also attracts, so the sutras are attract living beings who are in need of the teaching. So this is most common for people who kind of stumbled upon Buddhism, right? Where you may be interested or curious about Buddhism, right? And so you read a sutra and you're like, oh, this is pretty profound. Like this makes sense to me, right? And so it's attracting you to it and attracting you to want to know more or read more. The third meaning is also method. So the methods used in cultivation, which have been employed from the Buddha's time up until the present time, right? Where it's kind of still applicable. So the teachings that were taught in the Buddha's time are still applicable today to our lives today, right? 2,600 some years, right? And so it's applicable still because we can still learn and utilize the sutras as canon, right? So the Four Noble Truths are still applicable today. We can still utilize the teachings of the Four Noble Truths to understand the mind. We can still learn and teach and practice the Eightfold Path, because the Eightfold Path is still relevant and we can still practice it in this time, right? And the 12 links of dependent origination, meditation, right? Meta meditation, concentration meditation, vipassana meditation, like all these are still applicable. And then the fourth meaning is the permanence. So sutras are permanent and unchanging. So not one word can be left out or added to them. And so this is essentially just not changing the sutra, right? And so it's one thing to write commentary on it. It's one thing to teach a sutra, but we cannot go in and rewrite the sutra, right? We can't change the origin of these sutras or these teachings. We can teach on them, right? We can give our own opinions about them, our own commentary and our own experience, but the sutras are not meant to be changed. They're canon, so they're kind of stuck in its place. And then of the common title, then we land in the 7 classifications of sutra titles. And there's 3 main, but they all, again, have subcategories. And so in order to clarify their content, the sutra titles are divided into 7 parts by their reference to person, dharma, and analogy. So the first classification is single 3, meaning that 3 of the 7 titles are established by reference to either person, dharma, or analogy. And so, for instance, if we take the Amitabha Sutra that we're studying, this refers only to people. Shakyamuni Buddha and Amitabha Buddha were both people who cultivated the way and practiced and both attained enlightenment and became Buddhas. The second example is the Great Parinirvana Sutra. This is an example of a title classified by reference to a dharma specifically. The third example is the Net of Brahma Sutra, or the Brahma Net Sutra. This is a title established only by reference to analogy. It's the analogy of the net of the great Brahma king. The net of Brahma is kind of the analogy for the precepts. It's the analogy for interdependence, or interconnectedness, sorry. The second classification is double 3. So these are titles that are established by reference to a combination of either person and dharma, person and analogy, or dharma and analogy. And these are called the double 3. So one example is the Sutra of Questions of Manjushri. This is a title established by reference to a person, which is Manjushri Bodhisattva, and the dharma that he requested from the Buddha. And I believe in that sutra he requested an elaboration on prajna, or wisdom. Another example is the Lion Roar of the Thus Come One Sutra. This is a title that is established by reference to a person, the Thus Come One, the Buddha, and an analogy, the lion roar. Why is that such a hard word? Roar. And then the last example is the Lotus Sutra, right? And so the Lotus Sutra is the example of a title established by reference to a dharma and an analogy, since the wonderful dharma is analogous to the lotus flower. The third classification is complete in one. And this is the 7th classification, contains reference to all 3 subjects, person, dharma, and analogy. And so and there's not very many sutras that fall into this category, but one of the sutras that do is the Great Means Expansive Buddha Flower Dormant Sutra. It's a mouthful, which we often just cut short to Flower Garland Sutra or the Avatamsaka Sutra. So in this sutra, great, means, and expansive refer to the wonderful dharma of realizing Buddhahood. Flower adornment is an analogy, which is the casual flowers of the 10,000 conducts that are used to adorn the supreme virtue of the fruit of Buddhahood. And so we can see that, or maybe not really see, but we can tell, hopefully now, that once we see a sutra title, right, we can try to put these together. So if you know if there's an analogy, if you know if there's a reference to the Dharma, or if it's reference to a person, you know what type of sutra you're about to read or hear or listen to. And I think it's important to know what type of sutra we're reading, because again, there's thousands and thousands of sutras, right? And in our canon, in the Sutra Pitaka, right, it's the canon of where all the sutras fall under. There's 5 divisions, right? So there's the short discourses, the middle discourses, the long discourses, the numbered discourses, and the connected discourses, right? And so there's kind of that general theme of dividing them into the 5 parts, but then within each of those divisions, there's subdivisions, right? Which is the 7 categories. But knowing the type of sutra, knowing the title, knowing what the title is referencing to and what it means, makes it a little bit easier to comprehend what is about to happen in the sutra, or at least be able to tell what type of sutra we're about to read. And I know this is kind of not important to a lot of people, but I think it's an important aspect to learn or to know the sutras, right? Because sutras aren't just sutras, they're not just the discourses. Even the title itself has significant meaning, and there's power in the title itself. And so it's easier to be able to remember sutras in this way, right? I can remember sutra titles because I make a mental note. Is this sutra title referencing a person, a dharma, or an analogy, right? And I'm able to remember those titles easily because I've made those mental notations. And so when I go back to those mental notes and kind of remember what type of category it falls under, I'm able to more easily recollect the correct title of the sutra, or the full name of the sutra. But anyway, so since this sutra, the Amitabha Sutra, falls under if we're going back to the 12 divisions of sutras, it falls under the category of sutras spoken without request. And so in the evenings when we chant the Amitabha Sutra, it's a very descriptive sutra. It's a beautifully descriptive sutra that describes the beauty and the essence and the perfection of Amitabha's Pure Land. And so the essential message of the Amitabha Sutra, it teaches us to recite the name Namo Amitabha Buddha, right? Because the Amitabha Buddha has a great affinity with sentient beings in this world, in the Saha world. So before realizing Buddhahood, right, he was a bhikshu, he was a monk called Dharma Treasury, and he made 48 vows, and each one involved taking beings to Buddhahood, allowing them to attain Buddhahood. And so he said in his vow that when I realize Buddhahood, I vow that living beings who recite my name will also realize Buddhahood. Otherwise, I won't realize it either. So just by the power of his vows, Amitabha Buddha leads all sentient beings to rebirth in his Pure Land, where they have the correct causes and conditions to be able to practice fully, right? In a Pure Land, there's no defilements, there's no beings of lower realms to kind of hinder us and distract us. It's a perfect place to practice, and so you have it's a perfect place conducive to your practice that will allow you to practice fully, completely, and easily attain Buddhahood, enlightenment. And so if living beings do not attain enlightenment, according to Amitabha's vows, that he himself won't realize Buddhahood. Therefore, if all recite his name, we can all realize Buddhahood. But there's a kind of caveat to that, right? That it's not just about reciting the name, right? Because we can say Namo Amitabha Buddha all day long if you wanted to. That doesn't really mean anything, right? You're just repeating words, right? So that in itself has no power. The power when Buddha is mentioning to recite his name, it's essentially a meditation. It's a practice of meditation. It's a practice of visualization meditation. Because if you're reciting his name, Namo Amitabha Buddha, you're also visualizing Buddha, the Amitabha Buddha, and you're visualizing yourself being in his presence, being in his pure land, imagining yourself in this very beautiful, conducive environment where you have all the necessary conditions and the means to practice full-heartedly without any distraction, without any desire for wants and needs. It's just a perfect place, right? And so it's by reciting his name and visualizing that, doing that visualization practice is what we mean here when we say recite the Buddha's name. It's a concentration method. It's not just reciting the name for the sake of reciting the name. Just imagine you saying, oh, I want to be rich. And you just keep on saying, I want to be rich, 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 all day long. Well, that's not going to make you rich, right? You have to do something in order to be rich, right? So you either have to win the lottery or work really hard or, make good investments, whatever it is, right? You have to do some work. So likewise, when we recite the Buddha's name, it's the exact same thing. We have to do some work in order to be able to attain enlightenment or to be reborn in Amitabha's Buddha land. Can you give me one of the evening chant books, please? There's a reference in there so right in the middle of the sutra, and it's, even though I have the sutra memorized, it's not coming to me. Okay. So in the midst of the sutra, it says, Shariputra, those living beings who hear should vow, I wish to be born in that land. And why? Those who thus attain are all superior and good people, all gathered together in one place. Shariputra, one cannot have few good roots, blessings, virtues, and casual connections to attain birth in that land. This is the part I want to emphasize. One cannot have few good roots, blessings, virtues, and casual connections to attain birth in that land. Meaning you can't be lazy, okay? Just because you have few good roots, you have few blessings, you have few virtues, and you have some connection to the Dharma, that in itself is not enough to become enlightened or not enough to be reborn in Amitabha's land, right? We have to put in the work. We have to put in the effort. And so those that practice Pure Land Buddhism or the monastics in Pure Land monasteries or in that tradition constantly say or constantly recite Amitabha's name day in, day out. There's nothing else that comes to mind. In the morning, they chant the larger Amitabha Sutra. In the evening, they chant the shorter Amitabha Sutra. And then on special, every other day or something like that, they chant the Contemplation Sutra. But day in and day out, it's all about meditation on Amitabha Buddha, right? It's to help. The reason why we meditate on Amitabha Buddha, again, it's not like a form of worship of Amitabha Buddha. It's not a form of, hey, you're going to save me, right? Because that concept doesn't exist. He cannot save you. He cannot make you be reborn in his land. He can't just pick you up and take you there, right? He doesn't have that kind of power. The power is within us. right? So if you want change, if you want to become enlightened or be reborn in a pure land or be reborn in a better life at the very least, then we need to put in the effort. We need to put in the work so that those conditions can happen. We have to plant those seeds so that can bear fruit. Right? We have to plant the seeds. And so in the Pure Land tradition, when they're planting seeds, every time they recite Amitabha's name is planting a seed, right? And so just reciting the name is just planting the seed. There's nothing else, right? But then they contemplate, they do the meditation, they do the visualization. That means they're putting it in soil, they're adding water to it, right? They're giving it enough sun and shade as it needs to, and they're allowing it to grow. So for every Amitabha that they say is one seed, right? But just the seed itself isn't going to do much. They have to do more work. The more work just means that they're adding soil, they're adding water to it, they're allowing sun to warm up the ground, right? And allowing it to grow and bear fruit. And that fruit bearing is what will allow us to be reborn in Amitabha's Pure Land. And so the first half of the Amitabha Sutra is describing Amitabha's Pure Land. It's describing what can be expected when we visit his Pure Land or when we go to his Pure Lands, right? At the very beginning of this, the Buddha is telling Shariputra, the land of ultimate bliss is everywhere surrounded by 7 tiers of railings, 7 layers of netting, and 7 rows of trees, all formed from the 4 treasures, and for this reason it's called ultimate bliss, or Amitabha's land. Moreover, Shariputra, this land of ultimate bliss has pools of the 7 jewels filled with the 8 meritorious virtues. The bottom of each pool is pure, spread over with golden sand. On the four sides are stairs of gold, silver, lapis lazuli, and crystal. Above are raised pavilions with gold, silver, lapis lazuli, crystal, mother of pearl, red pearl, and carnelian. And in the pools of waters, there are lotuses as large as carriage wheels, or as green, yellow, red, and white lotuses that are pure and fragrant. And there is always heavenly music played, and the ground is yellow gold. And all 6 periods of the day and night, heavenly rain of mandarava flowers fall throughout the clear morning. Each living being of that land with sacks full of the myriads of wonderful flowers makes offerings to the hundreds of thousands of millions of Buddhas of other lands. And in this land, there are always rare and wonderful varied colored birds like white cranes, peacocks, parrots, and egrets, kalavinkas, and 2-headed birds. In the 6 periods of day and night, there are flocks of birds sing forth harmonious and elegant sounds. Their clear and joyful sounds proclaim the 5 roots, the 5 powers, the 7 bodhi shares, the 8 sagely way shares, and dharmas such as these. And so it just goes on and on describing Amitabha's lands, right? And then toward the end is when it's saying, okay, if you want all this, okay, it's not enough just to have a few good karma points. It's not enough to have a bucket full of good karma or good merit, right? Just because you're slightly blessed, you have some virtue you've accumulated, some merit that you've accumulated, this alone is not enough, right? Saying the name itself is not going to be enough. And so he's teaching, and Amitabha Buddha is teaching us that, and this is also why there's the Contemplation Sutra, Amitabha Sutra, or sometimes called the Meditation Amitabha. In that sutra, I believe there's 16 exercises, 16 visualizations of Amitabha's Pure Land. And that goes along with us reciting Amitabha's name. And so as the people that practice Pure Land Buddhism, as they're reciting Amitabha's name, they're also visualizing those 16 exercises. And each of those 16 exercises are literally just that. They're describing the type of world Amitabha is. They're describing Amitabha himself, describing his 2 attendants, the 2 bodhisattvas, and so on and so forth, right? And so we have to put the reciting of the name with the visualization and also with the practice, right? And so just because you recite his name and then you do his visualizations, that too is also not enough. There's a third aspect here, and that third aspect is the actual practice. It is the actual putting in the effort to better ourselves, to develop mental clarity, right? To purify our minds from defilements and the three poisons. And so there's a lot of work, right? Buddhism is a lot of work. It's not an easy thing, right? But the good thing about it is when you do that work, you see the changes. You see within yourself how your habit mind is transforming. You can see, even though it may be subtle, and majority of the time other people will notice these differences before you do, right? Because it's hard to see change within ourselves. Imagine, like, all of us now are grown adults, right? Do you remember getting older? Do you remember your body changing, your hair changing, your face changing? We don't remember that. We don't see that. But if you have a friend or a family member who haven't seen you in years, they will notice the change, right? So likewise, when we do our practice and we start to truly develop our practice and to be more meditative, and our mind starts to get purified, and we start to really practice deep listening and mindfulness and awareness, those changes may be subtle and you may not notice them in yourself, but other people will notice them, right? That's unfortunately a big hindrance to a lot of people, because they can be meditating for months or years, but like, I don't really see a difference. Well, yeah, probably not, right? So they think they're failing and they give up. I've seen so many people like that, right? And it's difficult to try to quantify your own change within yourself, right? The only way you can truly quantify that, right, is to sit down and meditate on yourself. So you yourself is the object of meditation. So you start to contemplate, how did I used to think versus how I think now, right? Think of something that you've changed your mind of over the years. Maybe you didn't like something or someone 5 years ago, but now you do. Why is that? Why? What caused that change? Or it could be vice versa. Something you didn't like, something or someone you didn't like, but now you do like, or do like and didn't like, whatever it is, right? But think of how that change occurred. Why did that change occur, right? And if we've been practicing long enough, maybe your practice has something to do with it. And so if you contemplate on yourself, for yourself, then that's one way of trying to quantify some valid changes or true changes because of the practice. It's not an easy thing, right? It's not really an easy thing for ourselves to recognize or to validate. But I tell people all the time, especially my students, usually when we have like one-on-ones and they're describing, how much trouble they're having, with the practice, or how they don't have time or they don't really see a change. And almost every single time I'm like, well, I see a change. I know there's a change. This is why I encourage you. This is why I give you a hard time sometimes, right? It's because, and some people do need a hard time. Some people do need a slap in the face, literally and figuratively, right? To kind of get them back into the zone. So don't try to overjudge ourselves, right? We don't want to do that because it's not necessary. It's not helpful, right? If we think that nothing's happening, nothing's changing, then that mentality is going to stick, right? We don't want to put ourselves down, right? And so anyway, I'm way off topic, but that's kind of the point, right? Is when we meditate and when we're practicing, and depending on the type of meditation we're doing, sometimes it will be, I don't want to say easy, but sometimes it may be a little bit clearer to see some changes in the mind, or at least in your reaction, right? And that's another big thing that we can look at is our reaction toward things, right? Is your reaction the same as it was a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or even last week, right? Think of difficult situations we've been in, whether it's an argument, whether it's someone's yelling at us, or whatever it may be. Recollect the type of reaction you had. Is that reaction that you have a dharmic reaction, right? Is it a reaction because of your practice, because you've gotten better? I hope, right? Or is your reaction worse? You probably need more work, right? But those are some of the subtle things that we can kind of gauge our progress, right? Because the reaction is probably one of the easiest ways to do that because we know how we react to things, right? We know how we react to things, and so just kind of judge your own reaction, right? How was my reaction? You can ask yourself, maybe I didn't react right away like I used to, right? That could be one thing, but another thing is what is happening in the mind during that reaction? Are you thinking of what to say next? Are you contemplating a revenge strike back, right? Are you thinking of how you want to respond or what you need to do next? Or are you simply listening, right? Are you deeply listening to this person that is suffering, right? And if they're yelling at you, that's just their form of that's just their way of outing their sufferings by yelling at you. But your reaction is more important than their reaction, right? Because they probably don't really care about your reaction. They probably don't really care about your opinion, but that's not important, right? What's important is your own reaction. What is going on in your mind? Are you truly listening to this person because they're suffering or because they're angry, because they're sad, right? Whatever it may be. How are you responding in the mind? Because again, everything starts with a thought, right? And so if you're able to really deeply listen to yourself as you're deeply listening to this person, then it's a much easier process to react accordingly and correctly, right? You're not reacting out of spite or out of judgment or out of ignorance or discrimination. We're reacting compassionately, I hope, and with an open heart and open mind, right? That's essentially one of the biggest takeaways from meditation practice, especially when we do specific meditation like metta meditation, right? Metta meditation is an extremely powerful meditation because it reminds us, if you do it often enough, then that reactionary response of, I hope that may they be free of suffering, may their mind be at ease, may they be healthy, etc., that becomes a normal reaction throughout your daily life, right? And so it becomes much easier to truly respond out of compassion and out of generosity versus trying to respond out of spite, out of anger, out of impatience, or anything else. I went way off topic again. That's the point. But actually, no, it kind of connects back to reciting the Buddha's name, right? Because again, this kind of goes back to why we have statues, right? The statues themselves mean nothing. There's no power, there's no significance. Now, Buddha's not here listening to our problems, right? The power of these statues is that when we look at the Buddha's face and we see his majestic peacefulness and his equanimity and tranquility, those are the type of characteristics that we want to develop within ourselves, right? That is the power of the statues. That's what gives power to the statues, is what comes to mind to us, for us, when we look at it, right? I've said many times, we can take all these statues out of here, and this will still be a temple, right? But we have the statues here because it serves a purpose. It serves a purpose of being a tool to help you recognize and characterize the qualities of the Buddha or the Bodhisattvas and develop those same characteristics within yourself. The same characteristics of a Buddha. that is being free, free of defilement, free of attachment, and free of desires, free of all suffering, right? And so when we're reciting the Buddha's name and we're combining it with the visualization, and then combining it with the qualities that we want to develop within ourselves, this is what gives us good enough virtue, merit, blessings in order to become reborn in Amitabha's Pure Land. Okay, it's a lot of talking. Yeah. I was giving myself like 16 weeks, 16 classes to go over this, and I was like, maybe I don't need 16 classes. But now I'm like, no, I definitely need 16 classes, or more maybe, because we haven't even gotten to the sutra itself. I probably have at least 2 or 3. I haven't gotten to the sutra yet. I finally got to the sutra. So I still have some, at least 2 or 3 classes to talk about the remaining profound meanings. Because again, it's, I think at least, the reason I'm bringing this up and I'm adding it to this and not going straight into the sutra is because I believe it is helpful to kind of know these categories, to know what type of sutras you're about to read just based on the name itself. That way, if you're scrolling through, what is it? There's a, I think it's called Sutra Central or Sutta Central. It's either .com or .org, one of the two. But that has a very, not a complete list of all the sutras, but it has a very large, nearly complete list of all the sutras. And so divide into the 5 categories, right? You have the small, medium, large, numbered, and linked or connected sutras. And so when you click on one of those 5 categories, then it gives you the list of all the sutra names. And so unless you go through each one by one and reading the sutra to figure out what it's going to be talking about, what the teaching is, you can simply just read the title of the sutra, and you already have an idea of what the sutra is about and what the teaching is about. That way, it saves you time to not having to read the entire sutra to figure out what you're reading. So that's one of the reasons I'm bringing this up. So I think it's important to know that. That way, if there's a specific type of teaching you're looking for, or a specific sutra that you may have heard of that you forgot about or forgot this name, you can go through the list of sutra titles and fairly accurately pinpoint which one you can use. So I'm going to stop there. So we've covered the 5 meanings, well, one of the 5 meanings, and the 7 categories and the common titles. So again, next class I'm going to finish up with the special title of the sutras. Well, special title of just the Amitabha Sutra at least. And then go through the second profound meaning of describing the substance, which is fairly short. So I didn't want to start the special titles, but that's lengthy. And there's a lot of lists, and I ran out of room on the board to write more lists, and so I just stopped. That way we can cover that next time. Okay. Any questions, concerns, emotional outbursts? If anybody is watching online, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat, and my dear assistant will speak those questions or ask those questions for you. Or for anyone that's here, any questions? Yes. What is a garland? Garland? Oh, part of this. It's a type of sutra. So garland here, think of a garland. What is a garland? A garland, like the the garland of flowers you put, like you see in India all the time, right? The garland of flowers you put around. So a garland is one thread that connects 100 different flowers in the one thread, right? So a garland sutra is a sutra, as one sutra that connects multiple teachings in the same sutra. And this is mostly in larger sutras, so like the Lotus Sutra, the Flower Garland Sutra, the Shurangama Sutra, the Brahmanet Sutra. Oh, maybe not the Brahmanet Sutra, but other sutras. These are huge sutras, but they involve multiple different teachings into one. So it's all kind of in one place. That's a garland. We're all enlightened now. We're all sutra perfectionists, sutra masters. There we go, sutra masters. Okay. I don't have a link or anything, but I will bring a link for next class to give you the exact translation of the Amitabha that we use. I can't remember who is the translator of the one I use. But I'll have that ready for next class. That way, if anybody that wants to look up that sutra, you're more than able to. I'm trying to think if it's on our website. It may be on our website, so it's either going to be, I think it may be on the calendar. So on the events page, you go to the Wednesday evening chanting session on the website. I believe there's a link to the full chant that we use. That'll give everyone the actual translation or the copy that we use. I did, it's as always, it's something I also went in and kind of changed up a few words here and there to make more sense, or not make more sense, to make it easier to chant, but not so much, because the translation as it was already one of my favorites. I only changed a couple of words that were tongue twisters. I think what it was, impurity. So I think the original word was, I just had in my head. I don't remember, but there was another word for impurity that was just like, this sounds terrible when it was chanted. So I changed the impurity, which also makes a little bit more sense because whatever word it was tributity, something like that. It was a word that people would typically have to look up, or it's not very easily chanted. So I changed it to impurity, which to me makes more sense anyway, and it makes it more clear what it's referencing. Okay, that is all. If there's no other questions, I will close out this class. I hope to see everyone either tomorrow morning for meditation or Sunday. Otherwise, next class in a couple of weeks. Please join me in invoking the Buddha's name. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. any positive karmic action we've accumulated here today, we wish to transfer the merits to all sentient beings and wish them full enlightenment.